Hello, my name is Alex Matthews and my number is 00828 and this is my first HL presentation on the global challenge of security. My research question is to what extent is the Sino-Japanese confrontation in the East China Sea a threat to international security, and I will respond to this question using information from the past 5 years. The research question has a direct relation to the core concepts of conflict and sovereignty. International security, the ability to be free from violence or free from fear of violence, is a complex issue to measure and can be evaluated by 7 indicators: human, economic, food, environmental, health, personal, community, and political security. The most prominent threat to international security, conflict, is defined as a social phenomenon of competition between parties with incompatible goals and is often the result of disputes over claims to sovereignty, the ability to hold supreme independent authority over a region or state. Ocean governance is undoubtedly a crucial security issue requiring close examination in light of the growing maritime tensions in the East China Sea. The ongoing fragility of relationships between China, Japan, and the US have dramatically increased over the past 5 years, as demonstrated by standoffs between the maritime protection vessels and increased naval and coast guard presence. The region's prime political, economic, and security organization, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, appears divided by, on one hand, protecting the interests of member states, and on the other, an unwillingness to dispute the increasingly alarmist US warnings over perceived Chinese aggression. The importance of the East China Sea lies in its proximity to strategically important shipping lanes, facilitating trade and access to oil deposits, as $5.3 trillion worth of goods and 1/4 of global total merchandise passes through these shipping lanes every year. Furthermore, the Senkaku Islands are rich in natural resources, especially oil, and this is a resource that both China and Japan are significantly lacking. The maritime disputes over the Senkaku Islands have been a major obstacle in the development of Sino-Japanese relations since the end of the Cold War in 1991. Aside from a period of administration by the United States as part of the Ryukyu Islands, the archipelago has been controlled by Japan since 1895. Between the 1970s and 1990s, there was an informal agreement between China and Japan not to expose the dispute over sovereignty as they pursued diplomatic rapprochement and economic development. However, Japanese diplomats have explicitly denied such understanding in the recent years. Since 2012, the activities of Chinese naval and air forces have increased, and according to Japan, the number of Chinese vessels entering the waters surrounding the islands has increased from 4 to 28 times a month. Commentators have often spoken about increasing assertiveness of China's foreign policy. This is highlighted by the country's activities to uphold sovereignty and territorial claims, as well as its military maneuvers in the East China Sea. Chinese officials and public appear in favour of rhetorical brinkmanship and unilateral actions. This is reinforced by a historical sense of entitlement, as China claims by far the largest share of territory in the East China Sea, outlined by the 9-dash line. China doesn't adhere to international maritime protocols set up by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is UNCLOS. In tandem, China is maintaining the rights outlined by the ICJ, the International Criminal Court, to bypass trials requested by Vietnam and the Philippines over similar territory in the South China Sea. Rising nationalism in both Japan and China and a long wartime history have escalated tensions despite the countries boasting highly interconnected economies. Japanese plans of using self-defense units to control China's military presence in the East China Sea is a move that experts will say will break the status quo and may lead to elevated tensions or even open confrontation in the East China Sea. According to the Japanese defense military, the self-defense units would first send warnings to Chinese naval vessels asking them to leave the area. If the Chinese vessels refused to comply, the self-defense units would adopt armed tactics to drive them off. In the face of military provocation, it is likely that China wouldn't comply with Japan's request due to Chinese nationalism and territorial integrity. In response to Japan's plans, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Hong Lai said that Japan's resolve in upholding territorial sovereignty is unswerving when it comes to the Senkaku Islands, and urged Japan to exercise restraint. The involvement of the United States stems from the security alliance with Japan forged in the wake of World War II. This means that if conflict were to erupt between China and Japan, Japan would expect support from the US military. US President Barack Obama has already confirmed that the security pact applies to these islands, but has cautioned that escalation of the current dispute into conflict would harm all sides involved. However, in 2013, US combined forces in the East China Sea have been non-existent. This remained the case until China declared an air defense identification zone in November 2013, which includes the disputed islands. The zone prohibits the free flight of aircrafts in the area. Instead, they are now required to declare their intentions and adhere to the orders of the Chinese air traffic controllers. In an act of defiance, the US flew 2 unarmed B-52 bombers into the zone. This, in turn, boosted confidence in Tokyo as a result of the security pact, and subsequently Japan dispatched a military vessel a military aircraft into the Chinese air zone. China then responded by placing its air force on alert and sending fighter jets to escort and remove Japanese and American planes from the zone. China's military action, taking advantage of any possible means to achieve relative gains in power or security, reinforces their zero-sum approach, thereby challenging the security of the US hegemony. The military expansionism of China and Xi Jinping's declaration of a China dream, resulting in the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, fuel the view that China is employing realist strategies in the East China Sea. Many experts are currently advocating for the introduction of conflict avoidance measures, including natural resource sharing, military-to-military communication, establishing a multilateral binding code of conduct between China and the Asian countries, and international arbitration. All of these, in theory, would be the most effective measures. At the APEC Forum, that was founded in 1989 to promote free trade, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, will likely be a major focus for discussion that could potentially aggravate tensions between Beijing and Washington. The TPP comprises of 12 Pacific Rim economies, including Japan and the US. However, China isn't a member. Even though the agreement is ratified and open to new members, China has not indicated it will seek to join the TPP. With its slowing economic growth, it is debatable whether it is in the best interests of China to join the TPP and align with the US, or to withstand and risk conflict with Japan and the US. Increasingly frequent clashes between the main stakeholders heighten the risk that miscalculations by sea captains or political leaders could trigger an armed conflict. This would threaten the US and the rest of the world due to economic and military interdependency. The rising threats to international security focus primarily on food, human, political, and economic security. The deployment of military resources threatens both the lives of the armed forces and the indigenous population of the neighbouring countries and the countries that would be involved in the conflict. Primarily, Taiwanese and Japanese communities are dependent on fishing to provide food and a local source of income. This is now going to be jeopardized if conflict occurs and if the tensions continue to escalate by patrolling naval ships in the area. From an economic perspective, tensions in the area lead to economic stability and slowdown, which has far-reaching impacts, including trade and stock market valuations. Finally, due to the extent of alliances spanning from the Philippines to Japan, many Western powers would be bound by agreement or political loyalty to enter the conflict. Given that Japan and China have labelled their claims to the islands as a core interest, the dispute could have a significant effect on the political stability of the Asia Pacific and the US, and overshadow positive economic development in the region. Nationalism, natural resource exploitation, and global hegemonic aspirations have led to a toxic mixture of geopolitics, resulting in potential threats to international security. Thank you.